Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's dive right into the fascinating and honestly kind of invisible psychological forces that completely distort how we judge risks and rare events. Have you ever wondered why we completely panic over things that are statistically harmless, yet we happily ignore risks that are actually far more dangerous? Well, today, we are unpacking the mechanics of your mind using the groundbreaking research of psychologist Daniel Kahneman. We're going to see exactly why our brains are just hardwired to fail at calculating risk.
Picture this, a Nobel Prize-winning psychologist, a man who literally wrote the book on human irrationality, couldn't stop his own emotional brain from reacting to a highly unlikely but incredibly vivid threat. Kahneman wrote about visiting Israel during a period of tragic suicide bombings on buses. Now, he knew the math, he knew the statistics, but he still found himself rushing away from buses at red lights. His emotional brain, what he calls System 1, completely hijacked his rational brain, System 2.
Let's look at the actual numbers here, because that's the crucial point. During that period, there were 236 tragic fatalities over 3 years. But here is the massive denominator. There were 1.3 million daily bus riders in Israel at that time. So for any individual traveler, the statistical risk was absolutely tiny. Kahneman even noted he was actually more likely to be injured in a normal driving accident than by stopping near a bus. Yet, the public fear was massive. People anxiously scanned their neighbors, and Kahneman himself avoided buses entirely. Why? Simply because the possibility, no matter how incredibly small, felt very, very real.
So today, we're going to systematically unpack exactly how your mind works by looking at 5 specific cognitive glitches: the emotion and logic trap, overestimating the unlikely, the power of vivid outcomes, denominator neglect, and experience versus description. Let's get into it.
Starting off with glitch number 1, the emotion and logic trap, which is basically the battle happening right inside your brain. And this brings us to a really fascinating concept called the availability cascade, where an extremely vivid image of death or damage is constantly reinforced by media attention and everyday conversations. It becomes highly accessible in your mind. It's automatic. Your logical brain, System 2, might know the odds of a bus bombing or a plane crash are incredibly low, but your emotional System 1, it just can't be turned off. It produces this uncontrolled impulse for protective action. What Kahneman shows us here is that when terror or risk is vivid, the actual probability is totally inconsequential. You aren't avoiding the bus because of math, you're avoiding it because looking at it makes you think of a bomb, and that thought is deeply unpleasant.
All right, moving to Section 2. Overestimating the unlikely and how focus actually bends probability. If I ask you right now, what is your judgment of the probability that the next president of the United States will be a third-party candidate? Well, your associative system instantly goes to work. It immediately shifts into a confirmatory mode. To answer the question, your brain starts selectively retrieving evidence and imagining plausible scenarios where a third-party candidate could actually win. Because you are actively building a story to make the scenario work, you artificially inflate the odds in your mind. The probability you assign to this event is determined heavily by just how easily you can bring a plausible scenario to mind.
Which leads us to what psychologists call decision weight. This is the psychological value we assign to a probability. Kahneman provides another great example here. Ask yourself, what is the probability that a baby born in your local hospital will be released within 3 days? It's a totally normal occurrence, right? But instead of focusing on the normal release, your mind instantly focuses on the oddity, the reasons a baby wouldn't go home. Whenever a target event is unusual, our mind zeroes in on that abnormality, quickly producing scenarios of medical problems, which ultimately makes the unlikely event seem highly probable. This next example is just wild. It perfectly shows the absurdity of this bias. In a study by Craig Fox, professional basketball fans were asked to estimate the probability that each of the 8 participating teams would win the NBA playoffs. When fans focused on the Bulls, their brain generated scenarios for a Bulls victory. When asked about the Lakers next, the brain did the exact same thing for them. When you add up their confident predictions for all 8 teams individually, it resulted in an impossible 240%. By forcing focus onto each unlikely event one by one, the researchers made the participants wildly overestimate the probabilities. Let's jump into Section 3, the power of vivid outcomes, or why roses beat math. Okay, imagine I give you 2 choices. For a standard cash prize of $59, you'd likely find it very easy to value. You probably wouldn't do the exact math, but you'd quickly anchor it to around $50. But throw in an emotional, vivid image of receiving 12 red roses in a glass vase, and everything changes. The vivid image of the roses completely wipes out your mental anchor, making the actual probability almost irrelevant. Researchers even ran this experiment explicitly stating the roses were worth $59, and it didn't change a thing. The vivid representation of the roses entirely disrupted the calculation.
The big takeaway here is that affect-laden imagery, basically a highly emotional picture in your head, triggers a full-blown emotional response, regardless of the actual odds. In other studies, researchers found that the fear of an electric shock was completely uncorrelated with the probability of actually getting shocked. A 1% chance caused just as much fear as a 90% chance. Whether it's the thrill of kissing your favorite movie star or the terror of an electric shock, rich, vivid imagery overwhelms your mathematical brain. You aren't weighing probabilities anymore, you are just reacting to the picture in your head.
All right, Section 4, Denominator Neglect and Risk, also known as the framing effect. Picture this. You are given a choice to draw a winning red marble from one of two urns. Urn A has 10 marbles total, and 1 is red. Urn B has 100 marbles, and 8 are red. Statistically, Urn A gives you a solid 10% chance, while Urn B only gives you an 8% chance. The choice should be easy, right? Yet 30 to 40% of students actually choose Urn B. Why? Because of denominator neglect. Your System 1 sees those 8 winning red marbles and completely ignores the massive background of 92 losing white marbles.
Now, here's where it gets really consequential in the real world. Abstract percentages like a 0.001% risk of permanent disability feel tiny, but saying 1 out of 100,000 vaccinated children will be permanently disabled forces you to conjure an image of a single specific disabled child, because your brain is completely focused on that vivid image, the numerator. The 99,999 perfectly safe children, the denominator, just vanish from your mind. System 1 is simply much better at dealing with individuals than abstract categories.
You can actually see this cognitive bias get weaponized in courtrooms. A savvy defense attorney will absolutely use a vivid frame. They will never stand up and say, there is a 0.1% chance. Instead, they'll say, a false match occurs in 1 of 1,000 capital cases. Why? Because it invites the jury to vividly imagine the specific person sitting right before them being wrongly convicted. The prosecutor, meanwhile, will try to stick to abstract decimal points. The math is exactly the same, but the psychological gut punch is totally different.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, Experience versus Description, the ultimate paradox. So here's the paradox we all live with. Our reactions to risk flip completely depending on how we acquire the information. When we read a description of a rare event, like a 5% risk on a warning label, we overweight it. The explicit reminder and vivid imagery demand our focus, and we panic. But in choice from experience, the exact opposite happens. When we live in earthquake-prone California, we rarely actually experience the disaster day to day. So because we don't encounter it in our daily sample of life, we underweight the risk or just ignore it entirely. We overreact to descriptions, and we massively underreact to real experience. Let's bring this into the office to see how it plays out in our social lives. Imagine you have two colleagues. Adele is consistently helpful. Brian is mostly unfriendly. But on a few rare occasions, he was extremely generous with his time. If you need help, you're going to choose Adele. Why? Because your System 1 pulls your experiences into a global impression. Since you interact with them daily, your brain defaults to the norm. You completely underweight Brian's rare moments of brilliance because they are just overwhelmed by the typical daily experience of him being unfriendly. Unless his rare act was incredibly extreme, your brain simply averages it out. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to think about those invisible forces pulling the strings of your decisions. Whether it's the fear of a bus bombing, the framing of a medical statistic, or just how you judge a coworker, your mind is constantly battling between the cold hard math of System 2 and the vivid, emotional pictures painted by System 1. I challenge you to look at your own worries today and ask yourself, are you actually doing the math, or is System 1 tricking you again? Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and keep questioning what you think you know.